Hello and welcome to a podcast from the Cavell Group. I'm Patrick Watson and I'm joined by Finbar Guj Begley. Finbar, how are you
Hello.
doing?
Yeah, very good. Sort of a very grey day in London, but spirits are high. And
It's grey up here in the northern office as well. So we wanted to do a couple of podcasts to talk about some reports that we are publishing at the Cavell Group. And the area that I know you've been focusing on is your enterprise SD-WAN report. So I wanted to understand a bit from you about what the report is, the fundamentals behind it. So first of all, why have you been focusing on, and why have Cavell commissioned an enterprise SD-WAN report?
well, it's one of these hot areas of technology at the moment, which we keep coming back to and we keep getting asked questions about from our contacts and also sort of new people we meet in the industry. Is just what's going on with SD-WAN, what's the market penetration, how many people have deployed it. So this is sort of questions that we kind of need to be able to answer in order to properly evaluate how many service providers need to engage with the market, what is driving the demand, and that sort of thing. So we thought the best thing to do would be, as part of our bigger enterprise research report, which came out earlier this year, was to do an SD-WAN specific report for maybe the people who weren't as interested in all of our UC stuff, but maybe were just a bit interested in our SD-WAN stuff instead, and essentially just give something for them to work with. Would answer a lot of their initial questions about how the enterprise is using SD-WAN.
And obviously, SD-WAN is a fundamental part of cloud networking, effectively, and that underpins a lot of the unified communication solutions and collaboration solutions that are becoming so important for different businesses.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily underpin UC as much as it should or it could. And I think that's an important thing that we've sort of realized, is that a lot of people are deploying SD-WAN to support specific applications. And one of those should be UC because of how sensitive UC is in terms of network traffic. One of the benefits of SD-WAN, of course, is that you can prioritize and set specific rules for certain types of traffic, which is something that can help UC quality a lot because it basically allows you to treat UC traffic specially and make sure that it gets the attention it deserves as urgent traffic rather than, competing with backup activity or things like that.
How was the report commissioned? What's the sort of the research behind it? This is a survey of enterprise organisations, both in the EU and the US.
Yeah, so part of our broader plans for expansion of our research last year included doing this 1,800 company survey of enterprise insight sort of research, where we looked at a wide variety of companies of different sizes and asked them a series of questions across sort of EU, US, places like Nordics, Spain, UK, lots of countries you'd expect. And as part of that, we decided that it would be a good time to get some measure of the SD-WAN market as well. So we had specific questions tailored to evaluating, how much SD-WAN has been deployed, why was it deployed, what were the main reasons that it was deployed, and that sort of thing.
And so what were some of the key findings from that aspect of the enterprise research?
So one of the first findings, which was quite interesting, was that the US market has always been anecdotally referred to as being ahead of the UK market, or not the UK market, the EU market as a whole. But really, what our research showed is that gap is actually a lot smaller than most people might think. Especially if you think about the larger companies, which are the ones who have a lot of need for SD-WAN, the gap might only be a difference in penetration of 10%, whereas people would have thought that it would be a lot higher. The other thing that was revealed, which I think a lot of people already understand, but it is interesting to get that confirmation, is that a lot of the problems that businesses are having with things like WAN and broadband are still coming back to cost, which, is something that is anecdotally true. I mean, everyone would say cost is always a problem. But the second one after cost is application performance, which, of course, is something that people are probably hearing from their staff, but maybe haven't realized how much of a problem it is. So, when you think about cost and application performance as the two main drivers for a new solution, that means that there is definitely a demand and, say, an appetite in a market for something that can address cost, because, of course, cost is a driving factor in, your business's bottom line, and application performance, because application performance affects everything from employee satisfaction to employee efficiency to reliability of the service you provide to your customers. It affects everything. If your applications aren't working, your business can't function.
In terms of the the difference that you talked about between the US market and the EU market. What do you think the reasoning is behind that? Obviously, there's some difference in between the markets in terms of the logistical infrastructure, which might have meant that SD-WAN is potentially more suitable in Europe. Is that the case?
I wouldn't say that the technology is more suited to one market than the other one. I mean, essentially, because it goes on the end of networks to sort of smooth out WAN operations, you can deploy it pretty much anywhere as long as there's a decent line in and line out. The main reason that it was initially successful in the US are the two main reasons, really. The first one is just that that's where a lot of the companies that started developing it were, which is, of course, the initial Silicon Valley wave that you'd expect. And also, the secondary one is that for a lot of reasons, complicated reasons to do with monopolies and different trading regulations and ILEX and CLEX and all these other infrastructure reasons that different parts of America are served the way they are by telephone corporations, the cost of access over there and the quality of access can be quite expensive. So when you have a solution that can prioritize and optimize your use of access for things like, we're talking like MPLS costs and things like that, when you have a solution that can optimize that, it becomes a lot more attractive to the US market because they have these higher costs. Whereas in the EU, those costs they've never been at the same level as they were in the US. They can still be high and still be something that companies want to bring down, but they're never quite at the same level that they were in the US, which is why it reduces cost messaging was so effective in the US when the technology was launching.
You're keeping a close eye on this sector. What does the future look like for SD-WAN? Are we seeing any particular areas of focused development driven by enterprise requirements or by service provider requirements?
I mean, we're seeing a lot of development in terms of people are just getting SD-WAN or integrating SD-WAN with security. Like even just recently, Palo Alto Networks is a very well-known security company, acquired CloudGenix, who is a well-known SD-WAN provider. Certainly in the US, they're quite well-known. In the EU, they're not well-known as much. And we're seeing a lot of convergence between security and network control in terms of SD-WAN, a lot of integration on the current SD-WAN providers with leading security companies like Fortinet rolling out their own SD-WAN to supplement their security offerings. Really, my prediction for SD-WAN is that because of the way visibility works as kind of like an enhancer for your business and how you operate, because of how it works in terms of quality of service benefits and all these sorts of things, the idea that SD-WAN or a technology that incorporates some of the functions of SD-WAN won't become widespread in the next few years doesn't really make sense to me. So I personally think that SD-WAN will just become fairly broad and fairly applicable. Really, the only thing that's holding it up is the cost of like units and the cost of the actual hardware and things like that. And as that drops, and as the cost of actually putting SD-WAN on as your part of your contract at a company, if you're already buying access from a company, they offer you SD-WAN to improve it. As the cost of that comes down, there's no reason that the technology should just end up everywhere as plugged in to a company's WAN as your router is, just to make the service quality better. In terms of the SD-WAN development itself, in terms of product development, we've seen acquisition. VeloCloud acquired Neansa, who's an AI ops company. And the whole point there is that you're trying to boost the quality of what you can get from SD-WAN. Because remember that at a base level, SD-WAN is bringing you visibility and analytics and network awareness. And people are tying that in with things like machine learning to see how that can build their way towards networks that either flag issues as they arrive straight to the engineering team so they can be fixed before the customer notices, or even fixing those issues themselves and sort of self-healing networks. Because if the network can see what's happening, then it can theoretically fix itself before it becomes a problem. And then, of course, smarter networks that can improve the optimization of your experience when you haven't, actually changed anything, or you haven't had to actually do any manual operations yourself, and you just get a better quality of experience. So there's a lot of areas where this technology could develop, and there's lots of places where this technology could expand, and also a lot of complementary technologies in terms of things that enable more remote and mobile workers to access the network that are being worked on in the background, which of course become more and more relevant the more that remote and home workers become prevalent as the norm for companies, which they are set to become, and of course certainly are at the moment with the ongoing crisis that we have now.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. That was another area that the enterprise research highlighted, that there were accelerating trends towards remote and flexible working. And obviously, as you said, that's been accelerated now by the current ongoing global corona crisis and the need for people to work from home amidst sort of social isolation. And I suppose there is real scope for SD-WAN to potentially assist businesses in better deploying solutions and, as you said, amplifying that application performance.
Well, it is tricky because the idea of rolling out SD-WAN to homes at the moment is difficult because of the cost per unit, and also just the effect that it has on your home network. Because remember that SD-WAN brings visibility, so when you plug it into your router at home, you'll suddenly be able to see everything that your family is doing on the internet, which, depending on your family and your home arrangement, you may or may not want. So there are ways of limiting that, of course, but they do take an engineer to set up. You can't just roll it out and have people get a box and plug it in if you want that level of configuration where it doesn't just scoop up everything. So, in the current crisis, there are things going on, like VMware have offered a trial, for example, where you can get 50 home kits for SD-WAN with the VeloCloud platform, or 100 home kits on a trial, and then return it if your company doesn't see the benefit. So there are things like that going on that indicate that SD-WAN will become more prevalent in a home environment, certainly. And I think it will need to, because I don't, our research last year before this crisis showed that over half of the companies we talked to predicted that over half of their workforce would be working from home more than 3 days a week. So, there's 50% of workers in economy, or with this we surveyed multiple geographies, but in all of them the consensus was pretty much the same. Half of our workforce in the next 2 years is probably going to end up working from home more than 3 days a week. And now, of course, with the current crisis, that trend is completely shot through the roof. So, the idea that you could have a technology that's only suited to work for WANs in offices and doesn't help connect home workers doesn't really make sense anymore. There's going to have to be a change to the solution to incorporate home workers onto the office network as well, whether that's through a cheaper SD-WAN box that just does basic functions to loop into a VPN, or whether something comes along that just does VPNs and brings people onto the corporate network without worrying about the visibility and the analytics. But there's a lot going on there because, when you have these VPNs, and I know someone who has scaled up their VPN production by about 70% more people online on VPNs now at this national carrier across Europe. And, they're saying that they've had to limit certain types of applications being used on the VPN. It's like, if you want to watch Netflix during the day, we're not going to stop you, but just turn off your company VPN before you do it, because we can't handle the video traffic. So you may need that level of analytics from something like an SD-WAN solution in people's homes, or more awareness of what's happening on the VPN to make sure that the traffic is being treated the proper way. But I mean, it's a question the industry is still trying to answer.
As you said, the understanding of the relevance of SD-WAN is growing. If the listeners have got more questions to understand how it might be relevant for them or their customers, what's the best way for them to get in touch with Cavell or with yourself?
I mean, I'm happy to be reached out to on LinkedIn. So there's Finbar Goodbegley. Obviously, within the Cavell employees, you can see me there. Email me at finbar@cavellgroup.com. That's Finbar with 2 R's. Just get in touch those ways, I think, is the easiest way to get in touch with me. Happy to answer any questions that people have.
And the Enterprise SD-WAN report it will now be available on the Cavell Group web store as well, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. You should be able to purchase it zero touch through the Cavell website if that's the sort of thing you're interested in. It is definitely priced competitively, so it'll give you some of an insight into how the enterprise is treating SD-WAN across Europe and the US. And we do also have country-specific numbers as well, for people with specific inquiries. So the report that's currently online just looks at the broader trends across Europe and the US, rather than looking at a country-by-country basis.
Excellent. Well, Finbar, thank you so much for chatting to me and telling me a bit more about it.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. This has been fun.